The unexpected encounter. It was a dark, quiet night when the human first found himself in an unfamiliar place. He had no idea how he had ended up here, but it didn't matter. The ship was massive, its hulls dark and echoing with strange noises. There was a sense of coldness in the air, not just from the chill, but from something deeper. Something that told him he was in the heart of a place where danger lingered around every corner. The human had always lived a normal life, far from the galaxy's wars and adventures. He was just a regular guy, until that day. He remembered the strange lights in the sky, the sudden shift in the air, and then, everything went black. He had awoken on this ship, surrounded by towering alien figures, their skin a mix of silver and blue, their eyes glowing in the dim light. They looked at him as if he were nothing more than a specimen to be studied. "Bring him to the commander," one of the aliens ordered, voice sharp and commanding. The human was dragged through the ship's endless corridors. The walls were lined with technology so advanced that it seemed to pulse with life. He didn't know where they were taking him, but he felt the weight of the situation settle deep into his chest. His captors didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The alien ship was a silent world, and its passengers seemed to move through it with a purpose that left no room for anything else. He struggled against the grip of the alien soldiers, but their strength was unmatched. They were not going to let him escape. Eventually, they reached a massive chamber, where the alien commander stood waiting. He was a towering figure, his eyes glowing like fire, his presence radiating an aura of power that made the human's knees go weak. The commander looked down at the human as if he were an insect to be crushed beneath his heel. "You are the human?" the commander asked, his voice booming, yet cold. The human didn't answer right away. He had heard stories about alien encounters, but this was something different. The way the commander's eyes studied him made the human feel exposed, as if the alien could see through him, right into his soul. "What are you?" the commander demanded again. There was a strange edge to his voice, a mix of curiosity and disdain. "I thought humans were weak. Pathetic creatures, barely worthy of notice. But you," he narrowed his eyes, studying the human with a growing sense of intrigue. "You've managed to survive. You're in my ship, surrounded by my soldiers, and yet you're still breathing. How?" The human finally found his voice, though it came out shakier than he intended. I don't know. One minute, I was in my house, and then, this." The commander smirked, clearly unimpressed. "You will not deceive me, human. You are here for a reason. I will find it." He gestured to his soldiers, and they stepped forward, grabbing the human again, ready to throw him into a cell. But the commander held up a hand to stop them. "No. This one is different." His eyes fixed on the human with a cold intensity. "I thought you were weak, human. You surprised me." His words cut through the air like a blade, leaving the human with a feeling he couldn't quite place. Was it fear? Or was it something else? The human was thrown into a small, dark cell. The door slammed shut behind him, and the sound echoed in the cold silence of the ship. He pressed his back against the cold metal walls, trying to steady his breathing. His head was spinning. What had just happened? Who were these aliens, and why had they taken him? More importantly, what did the commander mean when he said the human was different? As the hours passed, the human tried to think, to come up with a plan. He had to escape. But the ship seemed endless. The walls, the corridors, they were all a blur. He couldn't remember how long he had been in this cold, lonely cell. His mind raced. The commander's words echoed in his mind. "You surprised me." There was something important in those words, something the human couldn't quite grasp. Suddenly, the quiet was broken by the sound of footsteps approaching. The door to the cell slid open, and the alien soldiers stepped inside. The human's heart raced. Was it time for another interrogation? Or worse, his execution? But to his surprise, the soldier didn't move to restrain him. Instead, the alien spoke softly, his voice low. "The commander wishes to see you. He's curious about you. It seems, you're not what he expected." The human didn't know whether to feel relieved or even more terrified. He was about to face the alien commander again, but this time, there was something different in the air. The soldiers didn't treat him like a prisoner anymore. He had their attention, and that could mean something dangerous, or something important. With a mixture of fear and curiosity, the human followed the alien soldiers down the dark corridors again, unsure of what was to come. The commander was waiting, his eyes still glowing with that strange intensity. The human felt a shiver run down his spine. Whatever was happening here, he was at the center of it, and he had no idea how it would end. But one thing was certain, the human was no longer just a weak, helpless prisoner. Something had shifted, and it was clear the aliens now saw him as something more. The question was, what? The human's secret power. The human was led through the cold, silent halls of the alien ship once again. This time, though, the soldiers didn't grip him tightly. Their steps were slower, almost hesitant, as if they were giving him space. Something had changed. Was it fear? Respect? Or maybe something else entirely? When the human reached the massive chamber where the commander waited, the alien's eyes locked onto him with a strange intensity. The human felt as if the commander could see every part of him, every thought racing through his mind. It was like being under a microscope, vulnerable in a way he had never felt before. "You return," the commander said, his voice low and calculating. "You've survived this long, human. But I still don't understand. Why? What makes you different from the others?" The human wanted to speak, to explain, but the words didn't come. He was confused, unsure of himself. What was happening to him? Why did the commander seem so interested? "You've barely lifted a finger, and yet, you persist," the commander continued, pacing in front of the human. "Is it the will to survive? Or is it something else?" Before the human could reply, something strange happened. It started as a tiny tingling feeling, deep within his chest. It spread, slowly at first, but then it grew stronger. He felt it in his arms, his legs, and finally, his mind. It was like an energy he had never known, pulsing inside him, urging him to do something. The commander paused mid-step, noticing the human's reaction. "What's this?" he asked, his voice filled with both suspicion and curiosity. The human's body began to react before he could even think. His fists clenched, his muscles tightening as the strange energy surged within him. He had no idea what was happening, but somehow, it felt right. The power was overwhelming, and yet, he felt like he could control it, like it was a part of him. In a flash, the human's hand shot out, slamming into the stone floor of the chamber. To his astonishment, the floor cracked beneath the force of his blow. The room seemed to tremble. The alien soldiers, who had been watching quietly from the sides, stepped back, startled by the sudden surge of power. The commander's eyes widened. "Impossible," he muttered, his voice barely audible. You have tapped into something. But what? How?" The human stood there, his chest heaving with breath, feeling the power still flowing through him. He had no explanation, but one thing was clear, he wasn't the same anymore. Whatever this was, it wasn't something he could ignore. It was a part of him now. But as quickly as the power had come, it started to fade. The energy ebbed, leaving the human feeling drained and confused. The room was silent as everyone, even the commander, seemed to take in what had just happened. "You are not what you seem, human," the commander said slowly, his voice almost reverent. "You have something inside you. A power we don't understand. This changes everything." The human shook his head, still struggling to comprehend what had just occurred. Was this something the aliens had planned? Had they known all along? Or was this his own hidden potential? Before he could ask, the commander turned sharply and gestured for the soldiers. Take him to the training chamber. We must see if this power is real, or if it was just a fluke. We cannot allow this to go unchecked. The human tried to protest, but the soldiers quickly seized him again, dragging him down yet another unfamiliar hallway. This time, the walls were lined with even more advanced technology, humming and buzzing with strange energy. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching him, studying him, waiting to see if his power was something that could be controlled, or something they could use. As they entered the training chamber, the human saw that it was unlike anything he had ever seen. The room was massive, filled with combat equipment and strange alien weapons. In the center, there was a large, raised platform where warriors, both alien and human, fought to test their strength. The soldiers shoved the human into the center of the room. You will face the greatest challenge of your life now, one of them sneered. We will see if you truly have power, or if you are nothing more than a weak human after all. The commander's voice echoed through the room. Fight. Show us what you are truly capable of. The human stood there, heart racing. He had no training, no combat experience. He was a civilian, not a soldier. And yet, something deep inside him whispered that this power could help him. He didn't know how, but he had to try. He had to fight. Before he could even react, the door on the other side of the room opened. The creature that entered was massive, a hulking alien with thick, armored skin and a fearsome weapon in its hand. It was twice the size of any human, its muscles rippling with strength. It snarled at the human, eager to test its strength. The human's body tensed as the creature charged. But this time, he wasn't afraid. That strange energy surged again, this time with more control. He felt it move through his limbs, guiding him, giving him speed and strength that far exceeded anything a normal human could achieve. The battle began, and for the first time, the human understood what the commander had meant. This wasn't just about survival. This was about power, his power, and how it would change everything. He moved with precision, blocking the creature's attacks, countering with strikes that seemed to come from nowhere. The commander watched closely, his eyes filled with both fascination and a hint of fear. The human was not what he had expected. He had underestimated him, just like all the others had. But now, it was too late. The human was no longer weak. The fight continued, and with each passing second, the human's confidence grew. He wasn't just surviving now, he was fighting. And for the first time in his life, he felt unstoppable. First test of power. The alien gladiator's footsteps echoed through the massive training chamber, each step thundering like the beating of a war drum. The human stood at the center, chest heaving, his body still tingling from the strange energy that surged within him. The alien before him was a towering figure, easily twice his size, covered in thick, armored skin that shimmered with an unnatural glow. The creature's eyes were narrow slits of pure malice, and its weapon, a massive blade that looked capable of cutting through metal, was gripped tightly in its hand. You will fight, the commander's voice boomed across the room. Show us if you truly possess the power you claim. The human felt a chill run down his spine as the alien gladiator charged forward, its blade raised high. The air around him seemed to vibrate with the force of its movement. There was no time to think, no room for hesitation. The strange energy that had awakened inside him surged once more, filling him with a sense of purpose, of clarity. Without even thinking, the human reacted. His body moved faster than he had ever imagined, his muscles stronger, more responsive. He dodged the first swing of the gladiator's blade by a hair's breadth, feeling the rush of air as it whizzed past him. He had never fought before, never been in a battle for his life, but this power, this force, it was guiding him. The gladiator growled in frustration, spinning around for another strike. This time, the human wasn't quick enough to dodge. The blade slashed across his side, a sharp pain shooting through him. He stumbled back, feeling the blood start to stain his shirt, but something in him refused to falter. He couldn't let this creature win. Not now. Not when he had just discovered the extent of his power. The gladiator was relentless. It swung again, its movements fast and brutal, the blade a blur of deadly force. The human raised his arms instinctively, and to his surprise, the energy inside him reacted. His body seemed to shift, his muscles tightening as he caught the blade with his bare hands. The impact sent a shockwave of pain through his arms, but he held on, his eyes blazing with newfound strength. He twisted the blade with surprising ease, yanking it from the gladiator's grip and throwing it to the side. For a moment, the room was silent. The gladiator stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief, as if it couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The commander's voice was cold, almost imperceptible in its shock. You are not weak. The human didn't have time to process the words. The gladiator roared in anger, launching itself at him with its bare fists, intent on crushing him into the floor. The human sidestepped just in time, feeling the alien's massive fist graze his cheek. He had to stay focused. He had to finish this. The power surged again, stronger this time. The human's body reacted without hesitation, his feet moving faster, his strength growing with each breath. He closed the gap between himself and the gladiator in an instant, his fist connecting with the alien's jaw in a blow so strong that it sent the creature stumbling back. The gladiator's head snapped to the side, its body shaking from the force of the impact. It let out a roar of pain, but before it could recover, the human struck again, this time in the chest. The force of the punch sent the gladiator crashing to the ground, the sound of its fall vibrating through the room. The alien struggled to get up, its eyes wide with disbelief. The human stood over it, breathing heavily, his fists clenched as he prepared for whatever came next. The commander watched intently, his eyes narrowed. The alien soldiers who had been observing the fight stood in stunned silence, unable to believe what they were witnessing. No one had ever been able to land such a blow on the gladiator before, not even the strongest of their kind. And yet, here was this human, seemingly nothing more than an ordinary being, defeating the mightiest warrior they had ever known. For a moment, everything was still. The gladiator slowly rose to its feet, its eyes full of fury. But it didn't charge. Instead, it took a step back, seemingly uncertain. The human's victory, however temporary, had shaken the creature's confidence to its core. The commander finally spoke, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and frustration. Enough. The human has proven his strength. The gladiator growled but obeyed, stepping aside as the human, bloodied and exhausted, stood tall. He had done it. He had faced down a creature far stronger than him and walked away victorious. But as the adrenaline of the fight began to fade, the human realized something terrifying. This was only the beginning. His powers were growing, but so was the danger. The aliens now knew he was a threat, and they would stop at nothing to control him. Or worse, destroy him. Still, he couldn't help but feel a rush of exhilaration. He had never felt so alive. This power, this strange, foreign energy, it was his now. And for the first time since his capture, he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he could survive this after all. Maybe he could escape this war, and change everything. As the commander turned away, his expression unreadable, the human knew this was far from over. The gladiator may have fallen, but the true test was yet to come. And he was ready for whatever they would throw at him next. The price of power. The sound of footsteps echoed through the corridors of the alien ship, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to follow the human wherever he went. Despite the victory in the training chamber, a deep sense of unease gnawed at his insides. The energy inside him was still there, but it was a wild, unpredictable force that he couldn't control fully. Every time it surged, it left him feeling more drained, more uncertain. And every time he used it, the commander's watchful eyes grew colder, more calculating. It was clear now, this power, whatever it was both a gift and a curse. The soldiers who had watched the battle in silence now surrounded him, their expressions unreadable. The human felt their eyes on him, as though they were measuring him, trying to figure out what made him tick. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, not just in the way they viewed him, but in the very air around him. The ship, once a cold, impersonal place, now felt like a prison. As he was led down more winding hallways, past rooms filled with alien technology he could barely comprehend, his mind raced. The power he had unleashed, what was it? Was it something inside him that had always been there, dormant, waiting for a trigger? Or was it something the aliens had accidentally unlocked and they brought him aboard their ship? He didn't know. And the uncertainty made him uneasy. They finally stopped in front of a large metal door, more fortified than anything he had seen so far. The soldiers stepped aside, and the door slid open with a hiss. Inside was a dark room, lit only by the faint glow of strange symbols etched into the walls. At the center of the room stood the commander, his silhouette imposing in the dim light. "Enter, human," the commander's voice was low, measured. "It's time for you to learn what you truly are." The human hesitated but stepped inside. As the door closed behind him, a feeling of isolation settled over him. He could feel the weight of the commander's gaze on him, and he knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. The commander studied him for a long moment, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of curiosity and calculation. Finally, he spoke. "The power you've displayed is unlike anything I've seen before. It doesn't belong to your kind. Where did it come from?" The human took a deep breath, unsure how to respond. "I don't know. It just happens. I don't control it." The commander's lips curled into a smirk. "You're lying. You do control it. That much is clear. What you don't understand is that power always comes with a price. You are not the first human to be in this position, but you will be the last." The human's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" "You think this energy is a gift," the commander said, taking a step closer. "But power has a cost. The more you use it, the more it takes from you. Your body, your mind, even your very soul. It feeds on your fear, your anger, your desperation. And it will consume you. Slowly, piece by piece." The words hit the human like a punch to the gut. He had always known that power couldn't be free, that there had to be some sort of consequence. But hearing it from the commander made it feel all the more real. He felt a knot form in his stomach. The commander continued, his voice colder than ever. "You will never be able to control it fully. It will destroy you from the inside out, and when it's done with you, you'll be nothing more than a shell, empty, broken, and forgotten. You are a pawn, human, and your power will eventually betray you." The human's mind raced. He had seen the power he could wield, the strength, the speed, the almost godlike abilities that surged through his body. But now the commander's words were sinking in. The price of using this power, what if it was true? What if, by trying to survive, he was only digging his own grave? The silence in the room grew heavier, and the human felt the weight of the commander's words pressing down on him. He wanted to scream, to deny everything the alien had said, but deep inside, a part of him feared it might be true. "I'm not a pawn," the human said, his voice shaky but firm. "I won't let this power control me." The commander laughed softly, the sound sending a chill through the room. "We'll see. You can try to fight it, but you won't win. The sooner you accept your fate, the easier it will be." The human clenched his fists, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what was true anymore. But one thing was clear, he couldn't give in. He wouldn't let the aliens win. He wouldn't become a puppet for their amusement. "I don't care what you think," the human said through gritted teeth. "I will control this power. I'll make it mine, no matter what it costs." The commander's eyes gleamed with a dangerous light, as though he were savoring the challenge. Then you will learn the hard way, human. Let's see how long you last. With a wave of his hand, the commander signaled for the soldiers to step forward. One of them activated a control panel on the wall, and a massive steel cage descended from the ceiling, trapping the human in the center of the room. You will fight again, the commander said. But this time, you will face something that even your power cannot overcome. The human's heart sank as the cage locked into place. He had no idea what was coming, but he could feel it, something even worse than the gladiator, something more dangerous. The commander's cold smile only made his fear grow. Whatever was about to happen, the human knew one thing: he was about to face the true test of his power. And whether he liked it or not, this time, there would be no turning back. The ultimate challenge. The steel cage around the human hummed to life, its walls glowing with a faint, eerie light. He could feel the temperature drop, the air growing thick with tension. His mind raced as he stood at the center, trying to steady his breathing, trying to prepare for whatever the commander had planned. Whatever it was clear that this wasn't just another test, it was something far more dangerous. The commander stood outside the cage, his expression unreadable, as the alien soldiers filed into the room, their eyes fixed on the human with a mix of curiosity and anticipation. It was as though they were watching a spectator sport, waiting to see how long he could last. The human could feel their gaze burning into him, but he refused to let it break his focus. He wasn't just fighting for survival now. He was fighting for control, for his freedom. A low rumble echoed through the room, shaking the ground beneath him. The air around him seemed to vibrate with energy, and the hum of the cage grew louder. Then, without warning, a large door on the far side of the chamber slid open with a mechanical screech. The human's heart skipped a beat as he saw what emerged from the shadows. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The creature that stepped into the room was massive, its size alone was enough to send a ripple of fear through him. Standing at least 3 times the height of an average human, its body was a grotesque amalgamation of organic and mechanical parts, a hulking fusion of alien technology and savage muscle. Its face was covered by a helmet, but its glowing eyes pierced through the darkness like burning coals, radiating malice. The creature's arms were like tree trunks, and its fingers were tipped with claws that looked capable of slicing through solid rock. The human's breath caught in his throat. This was no gladiator. This was something else entirely. The creature's footsteps were slow and deliberate, but with every step, the ground seemed to tremble. It was a machine of destruction, designed to crush anything in its path. The human swallowed hard, trying to steady himself. There was no room for hesitation now. His power, the strange energy inside him, would be the only thing that stood between him and certain death. The commander's voice echoed through the chamber, cold and detached. This is the Zarkar, a genetically modified war machine. It has defeated entire battalions of soldiers. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot be stopped. You will fight it, human. And if you survive, we will know if you truly possess the power you claim. The human's fists clenched. He didn't know how he could fight something like this. But there was no choice. If he didn't, he would be crushed like everyone else who had faced the Zarkar before. The creature let out a low growl, its eyes narrowing as it fixed its gaze on the human. It was sizing him up, waiting for the moment to strike. Without warning, the Zarkar lunged forward, its massive claws swiping through the air with terrifying speed. The human barely had time to react. The blow landed with a deafening crash, sending him flying across the cage, slamming into the far wall with a sickening thud. Pain exploded through his chest, and for a moment, he thought he might lose consciousness. But he couldn't afford to be weak. He had to get up. He had to fight. The energy inside him flared to life, and he pushed himself off the ground, shaking off the pain. The Zarkar was already charging again, its claws gleaming in the dim light. This time, the human was ready. With a primal roar, he tapped into the power that surged through him. His body responded faster than ever, his limbs moving with unnatural speed. He ducked under the Zarker's swipe, feeling the air rush past him as the claws narrowly missed his head. He wasn't just dodging now, he was anticipating, reacting before the creature even made its move. The human's fist shot forward, landing squarely in the Zarker's chest. For a moment, there was silence. The blow should have had no effect on something so massive, but to the human's surprise, the creature staggered back, the shockwave from the punch rattling its mechanical parts. The human barely had time to register the impact before the Zarker retaliated. It swung its massive arm, catching the human across the ribs and sending him crashing into the wall once again. Pain flared, but he couldn't stop. He had to keep going. The power surged again, stronger this time. The human's muscles tightened, his focus sharpening as the energy flowed through him like an unstoppable tide. He gritted his teeth and forced himself to stand. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was fighting back. The Zarker might have been a machine of war, but the human wasn't just a man. Not anymore. The Zarker charged again, but this time, the human didn't dodge. Instead, he met the creature head-on, his fist colliding with its midsection with a sound that echoed throughout the chamber. The impact sent a shockwave through the creature's body, causing it to stagger back, its glowing eyes flashing with sudden surprise. Before the creature could recover, the human struck again. His punches were faster, stronger, each one landing with a force that left the Zarker reeling. The creature's armor began to crack, the mechanical parts groaning as they were slowly torn apart by the human's relentless assault. For a moment, the human thought he could see fear in the Zarker's eyes. It was a fleeting expression, but it was enough. The creature wasn't invincible. And the human wasn't going to let it win. With a final, powerful blow, the human landed a punch square on the Zarker's chest. The creature staggered back, its armor falling apart piece by piece. It let out a horrible screech, its glowing eyes flickering before it collapsed to the ground, defeated. The room was silent. The human stood over the fallen creature, his body trembling from the effort, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He had done it. Against all odds, he had defeated the Zarker. But as he looked up at the commander, who stood with an unreadable expression, the human knew that this victory was only temporary. The true battle had just begun. The commander's voice echoed in the stillness. You have proven yourself capable. But this is only a taste of what awaits. The real test is yet to come, human. And it will be the greatest challenge you've ever faced. The human's heart raced, but he didn't flinch. He had survived the Zarker. And now, he would face whatever came next. Because no matter what the commander threw at him, he was ready. Betrayal and revelation. The human's victory over the Zarker had been hard-earned, but it had come at a cost. His body was battered and bruised, his muscles screaming in protest with every movement. The power that surged through him was both a blessing and a curse, and he could feel the strain of using it pushing him to the brink. Every time he tapped into the strange energy, it left him drained, his mind foggy, his strength waning. He knew he couldn't keep this up forever. But there was no choice. He had to keep fighting, keep surviving. The commander had been watching silently, his face unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Whether it was admiration or something more sinister, the human couldn't tell. It didn't matter. The commander would never be his ally. The aliens had made it clear that they only saw him as a tool, a weapon to be used and discarded. As the human was escorted through the ship, his mind raced with questions. He had been dragged into this war, forced to fight and die for a cause he didn't understand. What was the purpose of all of this? Why had the aliens chosen him? What was the true nature of the power inside him? And most importantly, what was he meant to do with it? He had come to realize that the aliens' plans for him were more than just testing his strength. There was something darker at play, something that went beyond the simple need for a soldier. He could feel it in the air, the tension, the unease. The strange energy that fueled his power was connected to something bigger, something that neither the commander nor anyone else on the ship had revealed. And it terrified him. He was brought to a new chamber, far deeper within the ship than any place he had been before. The walls were lined with strange, alien machinery, their glowing symbols flickering in the low light. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, a weight that pressed down on him with every step he took. The doors to the chamber slid open, and the human was ushered inside by the same soldiers who had been his captors since the beginning. In the center of the room stood a large, cylindrical container filled with a swirling, glowing substance. The human couldn't make sense of what it was, but the sight of it sent a shiver down his spine. The commander's voice echoed from behind him. "This is the source of your power." The human turned to face him, his heart pounding. "What do you mean?" The commander stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You are not the first human to be exposed to the energy. There have been others before you, others who were chosen, just as you were. But unlike them, you possess something different. Something that makes you far more dangerous." The human's mind spun. "Chosen? What are you talking about?" The commander paused, his gaze steady. "This energy is not of your world. It is ancient, a force that has existed for millennia. It was discovered long ago by our ancestors, and we have been using it to fuel our war efforts ever since. But it is unstable. And for all its power, it has a way of turning on those who wield it." The human's breath caught in his throat. "What are you saying? This energy is dangerous?" The commander's lips curled into a slight smile, but it was not a reassuring one. "More dangerous than you can possibly imagine. And it's not just a weapon, it's a key. A key to unlocking something, far worse." The human's confusion deepened. "What do you mean by a key? What is it unlocking?" The commander's eyes gleamed with something like anticipation, and for the first time, the human saw a flicker of emotion in his cold gaze. "A war that has been waiting for centuries. A war that will consume everything in its path. A war to awaken the creatures that sleep beneath the surface of the universe. And you, human, are the key to unlocking it." The human's mind reeled as the gravity of the situation began to sink in. He had been brought here, not just to fight, but to unleash something far darker than anything he had ever imagined. His power was not just a weapon, it was a doorway, a bridge between worlds that no one should ever cross. "Why me?" the human asked, his voice shaky. "Why was I chosen?" The commander's expression softened slightly, as though he were almost sympathetic. "Because you are the one who can control it. You are the one who can unlock the door. And whether you want to or not, you will." The human's hands clenched into fists. He had thought that his strength would be enough to survive, to escape, but now it seemed that the power inside him was part of something much larger. Something he couldn't escape. "You think I'll help you?" the human spat. "You think I'll be your tool?" The commander's smile never wavered. "You will do what you were born to do, whether you like it or not. You have no choice." The human took a step back, his heart racing. "I won't let you use me like this." "You already are being used," the commander said, his voice cold. "You just don't realize it yet." Suddenly, the chamber doors slammed shut behind the human, trapping him inside. The walls began to pulse with an eerie glow as the energy within the container intensified. The human could feel it now, a strange pull drawing him toward it, as though it was calling to him. His mind raced, and his heart hammered in his chest. "No," the human whispered, taking another step back. "I won't do it. I won't unlock whatever this is." But as the energy grew stronger, he could feel the power inside him responding. The very air around him seemed to hum with potential, and the strange force within him surged again. He knew, deep down, that it was only a matter of time before it would be too strong to resist. And as the energy surrounded him, he could hear the commander's final words echo in his mind, cold and certain. "You don't have a choice, human. You will unlock it. You will unleash the war. The human stood in the center of the chamber, his mind racing, his body trembling. The key was in his hands. But the question remained, would he unlock it, or would he find a way to stop it before it was too late? The final choice. The room was bathed in an eerie, pulsating light, the energy swirling around the human like a storm. The hum of the alien machinery filled his ears, vibrating through his chest, shaking him to his core. He could feel the strange power inside him, as if it were waiting, urging him to make a choice. It was both a curse and a gift, an intoxicating force that promised unimaginable strength, but at a cost he wasn't sure he could bear. The glowing container in front of him beckoned like a siren's call. Its contents, a swirling mass of energy, felt like it was alive, pulling at him with a force he couldn't resist. The commander's words echoed in his mind, cold and commanding, "You will unlock it. You will unleash the war." The human's heart pounded in his chest. He had come so far, fought so many battles, faced unimaginable horrors, and now, it all came down to this. The power inside him, the very thing that had kept him alive, was the same power that would bring about a war that could consume everything in its path. He had already felt the pull of it once, the way it surged through his veins, making him stronger, faster, more than human. But at what cost? He could feel the energy growing stronger, urging him to act. The room seemed to close in around him, the walls pulsing in time with the rhythm of his own heartbeat. The container was calling to him, its light growing more intense with every passing second. It was as if the entire ship was holding its breath, waiting for him to make the inevitable choice. But what was the choice? Was there even a way out of this? The commander had made it clear that he had no say in the matter, that this was his destiny, that he was nothing more than a tool to be used. And yet, deep inside, the human refused to accept that. He had always fought for his freedom, for the right to choose his own path, and he wasn't going to let the aliens take that from him. The power surged within him again, stronger this time, the energy filling every fiber of his being. He could feel it, the promise of invincibility, the taste of unimaginable strength. But as the energy grew, so did the darkness that threatened to consume him. He could feel his mind slipping, the pull of the power becoming harder to resist. It was as though a part of him was already succumbing to it, letting it take control. "Fight it," the human whispered to himself, gritting his teeth as he struggled against the tide of energy that was trying to overwhelm him. He had to fight it. He couldn't let it control him. But as he stepped closer to the glowing container, something shifted. A whisper in the back of his mind, faint, but unmistakable. "It doesn't have to be this way." The human froze, his breath catching in his throat. The voice was not the commander's, nor was it any of the alien soldiers. It was something else, something deeper, something ancient. It felt familiar, yet alien, as though it were a part of him, yet separate. A voice from another time, another place. "You have a choice," the voice continued. "You don't have to unlock the war. You can control the power, use it for yourself. Reject the path they've set for you." The human's mind raced as he tried to make sense of the voice. What was it saying? Was it true? Could he really control this power, bend it to his will instead of unleashing the destruction the commander wanted? He looked at the glowing container again, the energy swirling inside. It was beautiful, mesmerizing, but it was also a force of chaos, one that could tear the universe apart if unleashed. The commander had been right about one thing, this power was dangerous. But what if the commander was wrong about the rest? What if he could turn it to his advantage? He closed his eyes, focusing on the energy within him, trying to center himself. He could feel the power surging through his veins, stronger than ever, but this time, he refused to let it take control. He would control it. He would bend it to his will. The human reached out, not to release the energy, but to contain it. His hands trembled as he placed them on the container, feeling the power radiating from within. The room seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat as the energy reacted to his touch, as though recognizing him, responding to him. For a moment, there was silence, an unbearable, suffocating silence. The human could feel the energy pushing against him, testing his resolve, but he didn't flinch. He focused on his breathing, on the power within him, on the voice that had spoken to him. And then, slowly, the energy began to settle. It was like a storm had passed. The air was still, the pulsing glow of the container dimming, and the human felt the power within him settle into something more manageable, more controlled. He had done it. He had bent the power to his will. The war, the chaos, the destruction, they would not come from him. He stepped back from the container, his chest heaving as he breathed in the cool air. The weight of the moment hung over him, but for the first time since his arrival on the alien ship, he felt free. The power was his. And he would use it on his own terms, not as a weapon for others to control. The door to the chamber slid open, and the commander stepped in, his cold gaze fixed on the human. "You've made your choice," he said, his voice tight with barely concealed fury. "You could have been a god, human. You could have helped us conquer everything in our path. But instead, you chose to deny your destiny." The human stood tall, his gaze unwavering. "My destiny is my own, Commander. I will not be your pawn." The commander's eyes flickered with something, anger, disbelief, maybe even respect. "You think you've won? You think you've beaten us?" The human shook his head, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I haven't beaten you yet. But I will. Because now, I control my own future. Not you. Not your war." The commander's fists clenched, his eyes blazing with fury. But the human didn't flinch. He had made his choice, and he would stand by it. The commander stepped back, his voice low and dangerous. "We'll see about that, human. You've made an enemy of an entire empire. And you will regret it." The human didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had made his choice, and now, he would fight for his freedom, for his future. And no matter what came next, he knew one thing for certain: he would never again be anyone's tool.